This is Chapter 8, Set A, number 6. So it says the scatter diagram below shows scores on a midterm and a final for a certain course. And part A, we want to guess, was the average midterm score around 25, 50, or 75? Okay. So we're looking at the midterm scores here. And we don't expect you guys to be exact. We're just kind of trying to get your intuition up on how you read these data sets. In real life or in practice, we would always just use a computer. We never ask you to do it by hand. We're just trying to get you to learn how to kind of visualize it or to kind of get that intuition. So the average, if I'm going to say, okay, my midterms go from about here to here, and the average, I'm just going to eyeball and kind of try and draw a line in the middle. So I'm going to say about 78. So was my average around 25, 50, or 75? I'll pick 75 because my guess was 78. It's really easy to do the averages. Now it's going to ask me to do the ST. Now on this, what they're trying to get you to do is to not actually try and calculate it. So what they want you to remember is that about, or not about, sorry, that's one of my other classes. We're going to say most data is within 2 standard deviations of the average. Okay, so with that in mind, we're going to look at this and we're going to kind of draw some lines for most of it. This isn't exact, you don't have to worry about being exactly right, but it says most, so I'll kind of draw some lines and try and cut off just a couple points, just like the last point or two, just because sometimes they're kind of more outliers. So I'm going to draw a line here, I'm going to draw a line here, so that's most of my data. Right? Then I remember most of it's going to be within 2 standard deviations of the average. So draw my average back in, I think my average is about here. And then, so it's saying I should have my average, and then I should be able to go up 1 standard deviation, 2 standard deviations, and that should be most of my data. Or I should be able to go down 1 standard deviation or down 2 standard deviations. So that's your average. This is like plus 1 standard deviation. This line is plus 2 standard deviations, minus 1 standard deviation, minus 2 standard deviations. So this is kind of the visual that I do. So I know most of my data should be within 2 standard deviations of the average, which here's my average, 1 standard deviation, 2 standard deviations. So let's see what that total distance is. This number was about 58. This number is about 98. And so how big was that? So that's a spread of about 40. And how many sections do I actually have? I actually have 4 sections. So saying you're within 2 standard deviations of the average means that total that should be like 2 above, 2 below. So that means 4 sections. So 40 divided by 4 gives me 10. So I'm going to guess the standard deviation is about 10. And so I guessed 10. And well, that was one of the choices. Earlier I did it eyeballing. I actually guessed more like 8. It just depends on how you draw your lines down. You're not supposed to be exact, but you should be able to figure out if it should be 5, 10, or 20. Again, most of your data should be within 2 standard deviations of the average. So kind of eyeball it. Say here's the end, here's the middle, drawing your lines. If it has a total spread of 4, just divide 40, divide that by 4. Okay, so let's erase that and try again for part C to see if we can figure it out. So part C, find the standard deviation of the final scores. Okay, so for my final scores, I'm going to do the same thing. I remember that most of my data, not all, but most, should be within 2 standard deviations of the average. So I'm going to draw lines that kind of have like most of my data. There's not a right or wrong thing. I usually just kind of leave a couple points on each side. So that's my top and bottom. Kind of eyeball to say that's my average. Here's 1 standard deviation. Here's another standard deviation. So this is my average. This is 1 standard deviation, 2 standard deviations, minus 1 standard deviation, and minus 2 standard deviations. Okay, so let's see what my spread is. This is about, I'm going to say like 8, and this is maybe 96. So we'll say it goes from 8 to 96. So that would be a spread of 88, and you have again that 4 sections. So if it's 2 standard deviations above, 2 standard deviations below. That's like 4 sections. So we'll do 88 divided by 4 gives me 22. So I'm going to guess my SD is 22. Okay, the closest thing to that is 20, so let's go with the 20. So again, that's what we want to do. I don't want you to try and calculate it by hand. I just want you to remember that most data is within 2 standard deviations of the average. That's all they truly want you to do. But I can tell you the person that writes the final loves these questions. It will probably be on the final. Part D says, which exam was harder, the midterm or the final? Well, let's look at it this way and see what the scores are. So the midterm goes from about 48 to 100. The final goes from about 5 to 100. So just based on that spread, which one seems like it was harder? It seems like there's much lower grades on the final, so I'm going to guess the final was harder, just because it has lower grades. Let's see, E, was there more spread in the midterm scores or the final scores? So which one has data that's more spread out? Well, the midterm again goes from 48 to 100, but the final goes from 5 to 100. So the final goes much lower. The numbers are much lower. You can also just see visually that the midterm scores go from about here to here, whereas the final goes from about here to here. So you can see the final scores are much more spread out. And then true or false, there was a strong positive association between midterm scores and the final scores. So if you were to kind of draw a line, it's going up, so that means positive. Remember, we always read from left to right, so it's going up. It means as the midterm scores get higher, the final scores seem to get higher. The points seem to be fairly close to the line. So I would say it's a strong association. So I would say true.